Many have commented that the MCU and these movies that make $1 billion don't tie into the comics, and that this is a problem. The problem is, it's true, that is a problem, but the other problem is that when we say tie in, I don't think a lot of people really understand what that means. So let me go into what I think it means. Hey everybody, this is Perch. It's common. It's been a common statement that we have these movies or billion-dollar movies, and yet it doesn't translate into the comics. And one of the quick observations people makes is that the comics don't reflect what's in the movies. And this sets off a bit of a debate. There's a lot of people who say, nobody who goes to the movies wants to go to a comic store. Well, that's not true. If you've worked in a comic store, you know that after a big movie, you do get new people coming in. You do get an audience from the theater that suddenly wants some stuff to do with Black Panther. When that movie came out, there was a ton of it, a little bit less for Captain Marvel. And then when the Avengers, both films came out, there was a ton of interest there. There was an interest in Ant-Man when that came out. But what is but so it is true. The movie audience comes into comic stores. They do. However, this is where I think people miss kind of what's going on. The next logical conclusion people say is, hey, when I open up the comics, it has nothing to do with the movie. It's unrecognizable, and so people don't buy it. And they're largely right. What's in the comic doesn't resemble the movie. But what they're looking for is not an adaptation of the movie. Comic publishers, Marvel in particular, have often published comics that tie into the movies. Those sell terribly. Now, granted, the creative team is usually not very good, and it feels like a rush job or a hack job. They've done digital ones that tie into the movies. Those don't sell well either. And they feel like an inferior product from the people who are involved. But here's the key, and I've heard this time and time again. When movie audiences come in to the comic shop and they want something to tie into the film they just watched, what they're maybe not asking for out loud, but what they're looking for is something accessible like the movie. They're looking for something that gives them the feeling of the movie. In many cases, when people do buy something from the movie theater, they're looking for graphic novels or one-shots. They're not coming in looking for a single issue of like part 3 of a 6-part storyline or any of the rest. They're looking for something that feels like a contained story, which is what they just got in the theater. And they're looking for something that doesn't require a lot of kind of knowledge coming in, that has the same spirit of the movie, where there's, a decent amount of action, not a lot of, talking heads, that kind of stuff. They don't mind continuity, but the story needs to truck along and flow. And it's one reason why, believe it or not, there was a Rick Remender Rage of Ultron, I think, book that came out. And it wasn't timed just right, of course, to match with the Age of Ultron movie. But it was one of those ones that in future years, as people would come into the shop, they would buy that one. It was one that worked. It was one that was picked up. And people generally underordered that thing, and it became a collector's item anyway. But if you look at the comics that actually sell and that are well received, like the Infinity Gauntlet, beyond the fact that it was related to the Infinity War and everything else, it felt like a contained story, because it was. If you bought it in trade, you got a kind of start to finish story. Same thing with Civil War. Civil War sales went up quite a bit when Civil War the movie came out. Now, Civil War the movie bore very little resemblance to the comic. They were vastly different. And the comic had a lot of things in there that, the movie audiences had never heard of. I mean, the Fantastic Four are running around, Wolverine is there, the Punisher is doing stuff with Spider-Man. There's the Negative Zone, and there's a lot of aspects to that whole comic and that whole series that none of the people who are coming in from the movie saw or dealt with. Yet, it felt like a good tie-in. People who came in from the movies, who didn't have a real relationship to comics, bought Civil War, the comic, were happy with their purchase. And oftentimes I would see those people again. They would come back into the shop and they'd be ready to buy more. In fact, in many cases, maybe they bought the Civil War comic book, and the Punisher is in that, and they're like, we'd like to learn more about the Punisher. That was a cool part of Civil War. Like to learn more about that. I had people coming in saying, was there ever anything more with Goliath? Does that story continue? And none of these things, again, are part of the movies. But what happened was there was a comic that was ready on the shelf that was easy to step into, easy to digest, had a complete story, had some action or multiple scenes of action. It felt like a movie in a comic. It didn't feel like a cheap adaptation that if you watch the movie, you don't really need to read the adaptation because you already saw it. It doesn't feel like a prequel, which, again, prequels don't necessarily sell very well because you already know what's happening from the movie. So reading a comic prequel doesn't really do much for you. It feels like an accessible comic. And this is where the publishers have often gotten it wrong. With Black Panther, when Black Panther, the movie came out, they pointed people to the Ta-Nehisi Coates run. That first issue, in fact, was even given out in some theaters, but it was not accessible. It didn't feel like the movie, very, very little action, not a self-contained story, kind of over very quickly, got kind of into the minutia of Wakanda. So not only was it not relational to what they saw in the theaters, but it didn't have that same feeling. It didn't feel like a movie. It didn't feel like a complete story. It felt like a little fragment. And even if you give the Ta-Nehisi Coates like the first 12 issues, if it was collected in a trade, it still wouldn't provide that kind of movie experience. That's the problem. It is why, and at a much lesser scale, because a lot of people didn't have it, Priest's run does better because it has that feel when collected of a movie. They missed the boat with Captain Marvel as well. They relaunched. They did the secret story of Captain Marvel where she goes up to I think Boston and she discovers that her mom was part Korean. And it just kind of redoes her origin, but it didn't give people a solid Captain Marvel story. In many ways, if they just collected the first 6 issues of Kelly Sue DeConnick or some stuff from Brian Reed, they would have had a better offering for people coming in from Captain Marvel. Just get a solid adventure of Carol being Carol and going out and doing something, ideally with some high stakes. But that's been the problem with the movies. The movie audience definitely gets interested in comics, but the comics aren't there for them to consume. And I hear a lot of people say, well, the comics need to resemble the movies. There's a lot of YouTube videos where they talk about how the comics need to reflect the movies more. It's terrible because, somebody watches a movie and they go get the comic and they're not seeing the same thing. And that is a problem, but the not seeing the same thing doesn't have anything to do with characters or supporting cast or details. It has to do with the feeling of a self-contained adventure. That's what's missing. And if you look at every single time when the movies come out and comics have had a good kind of product out there on the shelves for them, it's done well. That's why when the Wonder Woman movie came out, some of the the Walmart trades and some of the old George Perez trades did far better than the new creative team that was designed to take advantage of the movie. The Wonder Woman 84, and it's all jacked up now because of COVID and everything else, but that movie is primed to make a bunch of money, have a lot of interest. I think people will be into it. And the Mariko Tamaki, series is almost destined not to connect with that audience. Now, I haven't seen it, so I may be completely wrong. But unless it is the best way to do it to really connect with that film would be to have, even Tamaki, who cares about the creator, just say, come in and do a 60-page, big graphic novel, self-contained story. It's got to have Wonder Woman. She's got to face some of the same threats, Maxwell Lord, Cheetah, whatever you're going to do, but have it have a start, middle, and finish in this story that gives you a really strong Wonder Woman feel, introduces some parts of the bigger universe so people get curious and they come in and want to buy more comics, but it gives them a product that they can walk home with. Whenever the publishers start to relaunch the comic with a new creative team or something to kind of, hey, it's a bold new creative team to connect it with the movie. We've changed the costume around a little bit, so it kind of looks the same. They're missing it. They're missing the product that the movie goers want to see. Anyway, that's my opinion. That's where this conversation comes up a lot, but I always feel like people miss the obvious answer, and it's that is this an easy to consume, easy to read product that gives you start, middle, and finish, some action, not too much dialogue, keep it light like the movie, and make it tonally feel like the movie. That's what you need to connect with. And like I said, in most cases, people don't do it well. Civil War worked. Maybe by accident, just because it so happened there was a Civil War comic that came out that was an event and collected and had that kind of feel. Just like I suspect, Secret Invasion would as well, or Fear Itself, God help us all, if they ever make a movie of that. That's what people want. And that's how you connect with moviegoers. That's how you give them the entry product that gets them excited, connects them to comic shops, and brings them back into the store later. It's actually not that complicated. It's probably easier than what a lot of comic publishers do in terms of assembling a whole new creative team, getting a pitch for a year, and kind of all that other stuff. Just get a solid, one shot that's not a cheapo creative team that connects to current continuity. That's something you can build off of, but gives people an easy thing that they can consume. It's my opinion anyway. What's yours? Leave me a comment below. Let me know your thoughts on it, if this makes sense to you. Like, subscribe, follow me on Twitter or Facebook at Comic Perch, and thanks for listening.